this video I'm going to show you how I made these zero clearance inserts for my new sliding table saw.
To begin with, I removed the original insert and took some measurements of the slot. With a depth gauge I got the exact thickness of the plate and it's 8 mm.
Knowing how thick the insert plate needs to be, I now can look for materials that I can use. So just spruce softwood would be strong enough and suitable. Even better would be, for example, maple hardwood. But I decided to go with some laminated birch plywood. It's the same stuff that I used for my bandsaw table, and it is holding up just fine. I'm gonna make multiple inserts, and I want to use different thicknesses of this material. I have 50mm and 9mm, and that's alright because I have to make cutouts for the internal parts of the saw anyways.
Then I cut some strips to size.
Let's see if it fits. Well, no, I have to trim off a little bit more. Now this should take off just a hair of material. Next I have to make the right shape for the inserts, and therefore I'm gonna use the original one.
I sticked it onto my insert blanks with double-sided tape and then used a flush trim router bit to copy the shape.
Next I lined the pieces up on the table saw fence, and with a brad point drill bit I'm gonna find the hole positions.
Then I drilled and countersunk them.
Now with all the necessary holes drilled, I can mark where I need to make the cutouts to provide clearance for the internal parts.
But first I have to sand off the laminate from the back because you can't write with a pencil on that.
With the backside sanded, I can now line it up by eye and mark roughly where I need to make the cutouts.
With that done, I headed over to the router table and hocked out the areas in multiple passes.
With these cutouts I just made, the insert plate fits in the slot and it's a little bit below the surface, but I wanted it to be like this, so next I'm gonna add the leveling screws. So I bought a bunch of these little set screws to use as the leveling screws, and I'm going to use 8 of these per insert. I always gonna put them right next to the screw hole because the areas where I can put them is just not very big at all.
I marked their positions with an awl and drilled them at 3.2 mm, that's the right size for a M4 tab. And then I also countersunk them by just a tiny bit to remove the burr. Then tapping them with a M4 tab and putting in all the set screws.
Now I can put it in and bring it into perfect level with the table and the sliding table. But I already noticed that I might run into a problem because these set screws are offset from the mounting screw, and so when I tighten the mounting screw the whole insert plate gets a little bit tilted. So to fix it I just reposition these holes so that the set screws are in line with the mounting screw, and now that should work out just fine.
Then I took my best straight edge and made it flush with the table.
I adjusted it to be even with only the cast iron table because the sliding table is a tiny hair higher than the cast iron table, about, well, less than 1/10 of a millimeter. Because when you cut something with just the sliding table, then you don't run into friction issues with the cast iron table, and that makes the sliding table work even better. And because we are only talking here about 1/10 of a millimeter, this doesn't affect the precision at all. With the riving knife removed, I can now plunge cut into the insert and make the slot. I could just leave it like it is right now and call it a day, but there are a couple of things that I need to improve. So there is no slot to provide space for the riving knife yet, and because this part here is now really thin, it is not that strong anymore, and I need to reinforce this somehow. To reinforce it, I think I'm just gonna glue a piece of hardwood over the slot and then recut the slot. I can make this hardwood piece pretty big because there's a lot of space between this cover and the insert plate, and this should make the insert plate really strong then.
I used a really ugly piece of birch for this because here the hardwood only needs to be functional, not pretty. And here's a good example on what can happen with a normal insert plate. Did you see that? The thin offcut got sucked into the saw. Don't even think about catching it with the saw running. A zero clearance insert will prevent that. With some glue and a professional glue spreading tool, I glued the hardwood piece in place. Half an hour later I removed the clamps and they magically put themselves back to their home. Unfortunately the inserts didn't fit anymore, so I had to make some bevel cuts to fix that. It was pretty much a sneaking to the right setting with some eyeball precision.
And now with this piece beveled, I can fit it in the slot and under the sliding table. Now I can recut the slot, but because the bigger blade interferes with this support piece, I first have to make a clearance cut with the smaller blade and then cut the actual slot with the big blade.
This time I cut the slot with dust collection. Without, my small shop and the air got covered with dust in no time.
Now the slot is cut, but right now I can't raise the blade fully because the flange also interferes with this support piece, so I have to cut a little clearance cut here. And now with these clearance cuts I can raise the blade to full depth. So now the last thing I need to make is to elongate the slot for the riving knife. I marked where the slot needs to be and I'm gonna cut this out with the scroll saw.
Because the inserts were so long, I had to mount the blade in reverse to be able to cut this length on the scroll saw.
Well, it didn't come out super pretty, and now the end here is really weak, but it doesn't need to be all that strong in the back. It needs to be strong in the front, and there is a lot of support. So, because in the back there's just a riving knife, and you won't apply a really high force to this part here, so it should work just fine. The first one is completely done and ready to use. Now I just have to make the same thing for my smaller and thinner blades. I now have 3 inserts for my 3 different kinds of blades finished, and in the end it didn't really matter which thickness of material I used, both works, but if I would make more I would prefer thicker stuff. But maybe you still wonder why you would need such an insert, so let me show you. So first of all, it adds a little bit of safety, because when you cut something and there's a little strip on the waist side and you get near the end, with a normal slot it can be sucked into the slot, and with a zero clearance insert there is just no space for it to be sucked into the saw. But the other much more important advantage is the improvement on the cut quality, and that's especially noticeable when you're doing cross cuts or if you work with a very thin veneered plywood. Because when you're only working with this small slots, then all the wood fibers are supported on both sides of the blade, and that results in a nearly perfect cut quality. And as you can see, you get a really clean cut. Only if you look really closely you can see a small burr, but one stroke with sandpaper and that's gone. The only disadvantage is that I can't tilt the blade with these inserts. I would have to make a dedicated insert, for example, for 45 degrees. But because 99% of my cuts are with the blade at 90 degrees anyways, I'm okay with that. In the back there's just a riving knife and... So now the last thing I need... So I bought a bunch of these little set screws that... oh fuck. I adjusted it so that I adjusted it so that it is